So in the last talk, I started and indeed ended by talking about constitutional guardrails and talking about January 6th. And so if we move from January 6th through to the 2024 election, and the title of this talk is, I've called it "The One That Wasn't Stolen." I'm sure it's a small minority of you, but I'll be very clear, and this is just empirical fact. The election wasn't stolen. The 2020 election, I should say, wasn't stolen. The 2024 election certainly wasn't stolen, and President Trump didn't claim it was stolen because he won it. In fact, he won he won the popular vote. But going back to constitutional guardrails, just the idea of January 6th, and the reason I mentioned it in the previous talk was this was to stop the certification of the 2020 election. Now, by that term, I mean what was always considered a formality and is a formality. Vice President Pence, the vice president to President Trump, but also if you like, the ceremonial head of the US Senate, one of the two branches of Congress. Vice President Pence on January 6th has to certify the results of the election. A mere formality, but demanded by the US Constitution. And the certification would say that Joe Biden was president-elect. He would be sworn in on January 20th. So January 6th was about stopping the certification of the election. It led to, I think, 62 federal court challenges. Trump lost every court case but one. So January 6th was about stopping the election. But if we move to Trump's happy place, which is 2024, we see that the president wins the election and wins with quite a sizable majority of the popular vote. And so in terms of thinking about the 2024 election, I come to a second question that we can pose, which is US democracy really at risk? It's a question that commentators consider, as they should. It's a fundamentally important question. So the question of democracy being at risk in America does link back to January 6th. But if we move forward, we think about the legacy of the 2020 election. President Biden wins, President Trump loses. President Biden wins the popular vote. I think it's about 81 million to 74 million. He wins the electoral college by 306 votes to 232. But just a quick word on the electoral college. There's a long way of talking about this and a short way of talking about this. I'll give you the short way of talking about this, but this was a system put in place in 1787. It was a fix. As with lots of the US Constitution, an awful lot of what is done is a compromise between two groups who are arguing over how the relatively new republic should work, and also looking back to why what they'd already put in place wasn't working. But the Electoral College was in all sorts of ways a fix, a clever fix, but a fix nonetheless. And what it generated was a system perhaps best thought of as a republic, not a democracy. The Electoral College was a way of selecting or electing a president that would allow democracy to be restricted, to be constrained. In the event that we pick the wrong person, there is a way of fixing that. And so the Electoral College has a system where every state has a number of Electoral College votes based on effectively some version of population. So California has 52 members of the House of Representatives, and it has 2 senators, and that gives it 54 Electoral College votes. New Hampshire, with a population around 637,000 people, has 1 member of the House of Representatives, and it also has 2 senators, and that gives it 3 Electoral College votes. What that means in all sorts of ways is you end up with states that you can think of in 3 ways: red ones, blue ones, and purple ones. There are states like California that certainly do have many, many millions of Republican voters or Republican-leaning voters. There are members of the US House right now who are Republicans from the state of California, but overwhelmingly, California is a Democrat state. There will be people in North and South Dakota and in Montana and in Wyoming who vote Democrat, but those states are overwhelmingly taken as a whole, red states. What that means in all sorts of ways is there are states that presidential candidates just won't bother with. Why go to red states if you're not going to win them? Hillary Clinton was always going to win California. Joe Biden was always going to win California. Kamala Harris in 24 was going to win California. Indeed, she was a California senator. So you would campaign in certain states, but the ones that matter are the swingy ones, the purple ones, the states that are likely to flip. And so in 2020, we saw that Joe Biden won the popular vote and Joe Biden wins the Electoral College by quite a margin. And the 2020 election, if we look back to it, you have to think about it, that it's an unusual time. 2020, you have to see against the backdrop of COVID. That led to many, many millions of people, arguably very sensibly, saying, let's use mail-in ballots. Let's post our ballots. Let's not go to polling booths. Indeed, many polling booths were not open. Whether they were or not was determined by states, not by a federal government. On the day of the election in 2020, Trump wins, Biden is behind. Trump declares victory. This had been predicted. He was going to do this, and the reason he was going to do this is Republicans overwhelmingly were voting in person. Democrats were much more likely to use mail-in ballots. And so when the mail-in ballots were counted, Joe Biden was very, very far ahead. So that was the kind of the context of 2020. It also leads to January 6th in terms of as a catalyst. The election was rigged, the election was stolen. Trump stands at the Ellipse, which is the grass just south of the White House, at about 10 a.m. on January 6th and says, we're going to march to the Capitol. We're going to march to the Capitol. We're going to take our country back, or you won't have a country anymore. I fear I've heard that speech so many times, that's probably almost a direct quote that I wasn't going for. But if we move forward to 2024, Trump wins. Trump won in 2016 when he became president 45, but he didn't win the popular vote. Hillary Clinton has 2.2 or so million votes more than candidate Trump. But he wins and she loses because he wins the Electoral College. He wins it fair and square, but he wins because he knows which states to campaign in and how to try and swing them. The difference between a Clinton win and a Clinton loss was about 40 to 80,000 votes. It was not a big swing that was needed, and it was just 3 states that would have made the difference. But Clinton loses, Trump wins. In 2024, Trump wins not only the Electoral College, but he also wins the popular vote. And it's an interesting story. There are 7 states that are swing states, states that are purple, states that could go either way. And in a different talk, if we had time, you could look at why the pollsters got it wrong. Everyone got it wrong in some ways, but most analysts got it wrong for the right reasons. These states are close. They could go either way, but with the states we're talking about, in the West, you've got Nevada and you've got Arizona. In the Midwest, you've got Michigan and Wisconsin. Then you've got Pennsylvania over on the East Coast. And then you've got North Carolina and Georgia in the South. The betting markets were saying that Kamala Harris will carry Pennsylvania. She'll probably carry the Midwest. Trump will carry the West and Trump will carry the South. Now, what actually happened was Trump carried all 7 states. And that led to political scientists being at their best, which is predicting what's already happened. And I don't mean that to be flippant or dismissive, but it's very hard to say in America what's going to happen in presidential elections. The reason 2024 was so hard to call was there were many, many people that were not being picked up by polling. Take 1,000 people, hope you've got the right sample of people, hope you're asking them the right questions, and hope that they tell you honestly what their intentions are. It's clear after the event that the pollsters were not picking up many, many millions of people who were planning to vote and were planning to vote for Trump. Many more Hispanics voting for Trump than would have been expected. Many more Black American men voting for Trump that would have been expected. And then in terms of messaging, after the event, the messaging that the Democrats were using didn't seem to cut through in terms of the messaging that Trump was using. And I say this again without being flippant, Trump is a genius in terms of messaging. He seems to just have an ability to connect with people in a way that they understand the message and they understand that what he's saying matters to them. Whether what he's saying is true, I leave to you. Whether what he's saying is helpful, I leave to you. But messaging on the economy, messaging on immigration really played to him. And Kamala Harris just didn't seem to cut through. To be fair, she only had 107 days to run a campaign, because it was 107 days out from the campaign end, from the night of the election in November, that Joe Biden stepped down. So that leaves her no time. And then we look at 2028 very quickly. The conventional wisdom says when it comes to midterms, the elections in the House and Senate, incumbents lose. Trump is very likely to lose the House. He probably will hold on to the Senate because of the third of senators that are up for re-election, 22 of them, I think, are Democrats, 11 of them are Republicans. So the numbers favour him. But other things being equal, he should lose the House in 2028. I should have said 2026. 2028 is the year that he runs for a third term. 2026 is the likely outcome. He loses the House. I'm not sure he actually will run in 2028, but that's perhaps a question that we can pose and think more seriously about than I fear we should.